and welcome to everyone for joining us today. I'll first start by making some introductions. My name's Zara, and I'm currently one of the pupils here at Radcliffe Chambers. With me today is Kate Selway KC, who's chair of the Pupillage Committee, and we've also got Dawn McCambley, who's also on the Pupillage Committee. So the purpose of today is to basically give you an overview of the application process for pupillage and to give you a flavour of what being at Radcliffe is like. And also to answer any questions that you may have. And in order to ask those questions, there's a chat box. So if you could please use that Q&A section, we'll then deal with those questions towards the end of the session. I'm going to start with a basic question that all three of us will answer, perhaps from different perspectives. My question is, what are Chambers looking for in their applicants?
Do you want to kick off, Dawn?
I go first? Yeah, so the first thing is we're looking for somebody who we believe has the potential to become not only a successful barrister, but also a successful member of Chambers. I think you've got to remember that most applicants will have excellent academic results. So you want your application to stand out. And that's really about employability. You want to make yourself look as employable as possible. And that's where your extracurricular activities come in. So whatever stage you're at, whether it's first year university, last year university, whatever the case may be, try and join clubs, put yourself forward for competitions, build up your CV as much as possible, and just really try and make your form stand out.
Completely agree with those points. And just to add to that, and also to add to the criteria that's on Radcliffe's website, I've got a few points. So first of all, I think it's really important to show a strong work ethic. This will come through on your CV and your covering letter if you've got like a wealth of experiences and you've got a lot to show. But it's also incredibly important during pupillage and hopefully afterwards too. You should also be able to demonstrate your intellectual capability. And that includes, in my view, the ability to be analytical and also practical. Thirdly, advocacy skills. I won't expand on that, but that you can show that in many ways. And then finally, and flowing on from that, good communication skills. I think within this, being able to engage with a range of clients and solicitors, but also being able to express complex matters in a clear and simple way. How about you, Kate?
I would agree with all that, obviously. I think one of the other challenges that you'll face if you become a barrister is, well, twofold, really. One, you are going to be self-employed. And the other is obviously what comes with that is the ability not only to manage the legal problems you're going to be dealing with, but all other sorts of personal management of your practice and your practice development. And so I think you will need to be a person of resilience, no doubt about that. So how do you go about demonstrating that at the application stage? We'll perhaps talk about that in a little bit more detail, because I know we're going to break down the application process later on in this talk and give you a little bit more detail about that. But I think, obviously, what I think you need to bear in mind is that the bar is a self-employed place, it's a challenging place, it's an exciting place to be. And I think there are two things you can probably bear in mind as you're preparing your application. And one is, how can I demonstrate how I might have shown resilience in the past? So think about those sorts of examples. And secondly, of course, as a self-employed person, there are going to be many occasions where you will need to take the initiative. So can you show us how in the past you've taken the initiative? So I think we'll pick up on a lot of these themes that we've just mentioned now during the course of our talk, but those are the two additional things that spring immediately to mind.
That sounds great, Kate. And just as a follow-up, what makes an applicant stand out, or indeed do they need to?
Again, I'm going to backtrack slightly and reveal something that isn't a secret at all, which is that all sets of chambers will receive many, many applications. We read them all, and we have a limited amount of time within which to read them all because we're all busy self-employed practitioners. So what you do need to do is get to the point straight away. So things that stand out in a negative way, and I'm not going to mention any actual examples, that's a bit unkind, but the negative points would be, is your application long and rambling? Does it fail to get to the point quickly? Is it full of poor and unnecessary examples? The reverse of that, of course, is what does make a good candidate stand out straight away is being succinct and being persuasive, obviously addressing the criteria that we've specifically asked you about, because you will certainly stand out negatively if you don't address the criteria we've asked about. Picking up on that resilience point as well, we often have applications where a candidate has successfully demonstrated how they've overcome a particular difficulty, and of course we take that into account if it's going to give us a good example of how resilient a candidate is. So lots of do's and don'ts. Again, I think we'll probably get to some specific examples later, but that I think sort of kicks us off.
Absolutely, thank you. So Dawn, before we get on to some further questions, could you please talk us through the application process?
Yeah, of course. So a number of chambers, you applied to them through Gateway. Radcliffe is not a member of Gateway, we don't use them. But I would say that all the deadlines within Gateway apply equally to our process. So we're bound by all of those. We do it by way of a CV and covering letter. That's how you make your application to us. There's then, as Kate says, an initial paper sift. I think last year we had around about 200 people apply. We then went through every single application. We have a mark scheme, which is very transparent. It's on our website as to what we're looking for and how we mark at that first stage. Then we interviewed, I think, about 50 people in a first round interview. The first round interview is normally about 15 minutes long. It's a short interview. It's CV based, some ethics questions, some current affairs, quite short. Then we normally progress about 15, 20 people through to the second round. The second round interview is much longer. How it works is that the candidate will come into chambers for a day, a bit like a mini pupillage, because I think as important as it is for us to get to meet you, it's also important for you to get to come into chambers, spend time here, get to see what chambers is like. Is this somewhere you think you could work? You will also be given a short piece of work that you have to submit in advance. And then on the day of your interview, you will also be given some papers for a conference a bit in advance of the actual interview. You'll be given some time therefore to prepare. You will take the role of the barrister leading the conference. We as the Pupillage Committee will play solicitor, client and so forth, and then you give over your advice. And then there'll also be, during the interview itself, you'll have maybe 10 minutes discussing the written work you prepared in advance, 25 minutes on the mock conference, and then 20 minutes on other matters. And that's generally how the process works.
Yeah, that brings back memories for me. Kate, Dawn mentioned that we're looking for a CV and a covering letter. Could you please talk us through what we might be looking for in a covering letter?
Sure. What we say on our website and the Gateway material, it says don't send us more than 4 pages in total. We suggest a couple of pages for each thing, but obviously it's not set in stone. You might be able to put your CV on a single page, and that's absolutely fine. We don't specify any particular typeface, just make sure that those of us who wear glasses can read it and it's not in too small a font. So as I said, yeah, a couple of pages for each. So a good covering letter, there are obviously a number of aspects to this. The absolute basics, and please don't get this wrong because it's infuriating, because you can ruin a good application. Attention to detail. Make sure you'll be making a number of applications. Make sure your application to Radcliffe Chambers doesn't mention any other set of chambers as the recipient. We have had letters in the past where candidates, presumably just through lack of a final check through, have made those sorts of mistakes. So obviously that doesn't go down well. The reason it doesn't go down well is not because we get in a huff about a simple mistake like that being made, but it's a reflection potentially of your attention to detail and how you might behave once you're in practice. So we do look for meticulous presentation. We don't like bad grammar. We don't like sloppiness, not just because we're picky individuals, but because this is a reflection of how you might be as a barrister. And as a barrister, you are delivering a legal service to a client for which they are paying you, and they are entitled to expect a first-class piece of work and piece of advice. So that is so obvious, but I think it is worth stating, because every year we do get applications that candidates send in right up to the deadline, when obviously they've put themselves under a lot of pressure to get all their applications in on time. And that's when silly mistakes, and that's what they usually are, can creep in. So a good covering letter, attention to detail, get the basics right, write with good grammar, write fluently. That's the basic stuff. Obviously address the criteria that we look for in we set that out in our website. 4 main things we say, I think it's 5 actually: intellect, commerciality, persuasiveness, credibility, and commitment. And there's a little bit more information about that. Try and make your letter as fluent and as interesting as possible. This is an example of written advocacy. It's not a skeleton argument, but it's your argument to get yourself a first round interview. So make sure you address the criteria and do it with concision and precision is what I would say. And other than that, there is no right or wrong way to do a covering letter. Tell us about things that you believe will enhance your opportunity to be a successful first round interview candidate. So if you have overcome resilience, if you do have something that speaks to your personal credibility, doesn't have to be legal. If you have had a position of responsibility of some sort, tell us about it. Tell us why you believe that would give you the good skills to develop as a barrister. I could say more, but we don't want to not leave time for other interesting points.
Well, that's really, really helpful. And Dawn, could you just build on that and mention some do's and don'ts for the application?
Yeah, I think Kate has said a lot of the do's, and so just really to pick up on a couple of them very quickly. In terms of when you're putting in your covering letter, you're drafting that, make sure you do tailor it to what we do. We don't want to hear that you're really interested in immigration law or family law, that's your real desire that you want to practice in that area, but we don't do that. So just make sure you tailor the application to Radcliffe. In terms of grammar and punctuation, as Kate indicated, that's very important. Sometimes if you've been looking at something over and over and over again, you don't see the silly mistakes. So I always say, draft it, set it down, go away, come back the next day, reread it again, or even get a friend to have a look over it before you submit, just to make sure there aren't any silly typos or grammatical errors that you've put in by accident. And I think it's often easier to see those when you're looking at something afresh. In terms of things that you should not do, one of the big ones for me is please don't put anything in your application that you don't feel confident answering questions about in an interview. Because realistically, if it's mentioned in your covering letter and your CV, I will probably ask you about it. So for example, if you tell me that your favourite case is X and you really enjoyed reading about that, I might ask you some questions about that case, not to try and trip you up, but just because I think, oh, you're interested in it, that will be a nice topic to have a conversation about in the interview. And we've had people become unstuck on things like that. Or if you've mentioned that you took part in a particular mooting competition, for example, maybe just have a think about what that was about and remind yourself, in case I ask you about a submission you made or a difficult point that your opponent made, then how you dealt with it, things like that. So I think they're the big ones, because unfortunately you do get that where people come and once they get through to the interview and they fall apart because they just don't remember what they've put on their CV or they don't remember the details about it. And that's something that could be avoided very easily. So I think they would probably be the big things. One last thing would be, again, picking up on what Kate said, don't make your application too long. We say maximum 2 pages for CV and covering letter. So just take note of that. And also, I don't really want to hear about a hockey tournament that you took part in when you were 8 years old. I think try and keep it as up to date as possible. So look at what you've been doing in kind of GCSE, A level, university, that side of it, but maybe leave off things that are much further in the historical distance. I think that's everything really from me.
Those are some great points. I think if you implement them, that really help with calm your nerves for the interviews. And what tips do you have for non-law students who are applying for pupillage?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question because barristers' chambers generally do get obviously a lot of applications from non-law graduates. I don't know the precise. I haven't looked back at our figures for the last couple of years, but it's safe to say that a significant. I don't know about you, Dawn. A significant proportion of our applications are from GDL students. There's no doubt about that. That can both be challenging and beneficial, and probably a mixture of the two, because the non-law graduate potentially will obviously be that little bit older, and potentially will have some more life experiences to tell us about on their application form. Bearing in mind that as a practicing barrister, from day one, when you finished your pupillage, from day one as a tenant, you will be giving the advice to your clients when they come to see you in conference. You will be giving advice to people, for example, who are much older than you, who have decades more business experience than you. So those sorts of life skills and your ability to deal confidently with a variety of different types of people in society is obviously a very beneficial thing. So sometimes potentially the GDL student may have the edge over somebody who's a final year law undergraduate. Conversely, of course, the GDL student may not have the legal experience that they feel that chambers are looking for. But that's not a problem. Chambers often will take, not only Radcliffe chambers, but GDL graduates obviously have a very good record of acquiring pupillage. So my specific tips for, say, someone who is doing the GDL this year and who will be applying to Radcliffe and other chambers this year would be, first of all, applying to Radcliffe. What are you going to be able to do to demonstrate that you are interested in commercial chancery type of work that we do, and why are you specifically interested in Radcliffe chambers if you've only been studying the GDL for 2 to 3 months? Well, I was a GDL student myself, and I certainly knew within a couple of months that chancery work was what I wanted to do. So I think it's not difficult to develop your initial interest, but what do you do to foster that interest? Yes, you would be looking to apply for mini pupillages to increase your experience of the sort of work that you would hope to be interested in and practice in eventually, and therefore exploit those mini pupillage opportunities by obviously getting experience of the type of work that's done in chancery chambers and chancery commercial chambers, and to pick the brains. Within the bounds of politeness, pick the brains of your mini pupil supervisors, get as much knowledge as you can about our sort of work, because you won't have probably had the opportunity to do that prior to starting the GDL. So I think that's where the GDL student probably needs to do that little bit of catch-up work, whereas the law undergraduate might have had the opportunity already, I think, to do some mini pupillages. And I think what I would say, and perhaps I'll touch on this later on, is that there's generally quite a high proportion of people each year who don't get pupillage, but who do get it the following year. And a lot of very, very, very good people don't get pupillage first time around. And that's something I want to pick up on later, because you shouldn't let it put you off. But that's for later on, I think.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. So 2 words that are often mentioned when people are applying are commercial awareness. But what does this actually mean, Dawn, and how can applicants best demonstrate that they have it?
It is a tricky one, because often people say, well, what does that entail? I think the big thing is realizing that it's not just about giving the legal answer right. It's not just about giving legal advice. So, for example, in our interview process, we have a mock conference. So when you're there and you are the barrister and you're pretending to give advice to the pretend client, it's thinking about the commercial realities for your client of the route forward that you're proposing. So what are the cost implications of a particular route? How long is it going to be to achieve what you want to achieve. So how long is the client going to be involved in potential litigation? And also a big one for clients is what's the likelihood of them actually going to being able to obtain a financial benefit at the end of it all, even if they are successful. Because if the person they're suing doesn't have any assets, it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory if they go through this very lengthy, very costly process. They win, they're awarded costs against the other side, but actually there's no money there. So it's just taking a step back and just thinking about the commercial side of things and the kind of the implications beyond the scope of just what is the legal answer, and recognizing that, you know, for example, sometimes you get a set of papers and you think this is a really interesting area of law. Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. This point's never been taken before. I can see this going the whole way through the courts. This is great. But actually, does your client want to be that person? Do they want to be the person that's going to be pursuing that case through with the costs and the publicity? Or do they not want that? Do they just want to try and settle much quicker? So it's really just, it's being aware of that it's bigger than the legal picture.
That concludes what we've got to say about applications for now. But turning to pupillage and what that looks like, Kate, can you talk about what pupillage is like at Radcliffe? And then I can then talk about my experience.
Sure. I mean, it's a very long time ago since I did my pupillage, but as chair of the committee, obviously, I do have a detailed grip on how we train our pupils and how we look after them. And I think the first thing I'd like to say is that there is a superb continuity at the Chancery Bar, I think, for looking after pupils really well and ensuring they get an absolutely excellent training in a really supportive environment. It was like that when I did my pupillage in, it wasn't called Radcliffe Chambers then, but a fair few years ago now. Back in those days, we didn't have the level of feedback, I think, structured feedback. We always got feedback, but it wasn't as structured as it is now. I think that's one of the big differences. But we have a very, very supportive system at Radcliffe Chambers. I think just to look at some practicalities first, we split our pupillage into 4 seats of 3 months each. So the pupillage is divided that way. So you'll be sitting with 4 different supervisors. The other division that we try to ensure is that you will see a variety of the different sorts of work we do in chambers, because we have a reasonable spread of work across different areas. As an example, and in no particular order, you will probably sit with someone who does a lot of private client work. I'm mainly private client tax and trust practitioner. So someone, and I actually still take pupils, so someone who came to sit with me potentially would see that sort of work. Although I should say, since I've been chair of the committee, we try to not burden the committee too much with taking pupils as well. But there's the private client side of things. There's pure commercial type work. There is insolvency type work. A lot more people do. Some people just do a lot of pure company work. Obviously, I've missed out a few. Property is another strong practice area in chambers. Charity. You wouldn't probably sit with someone and do pure charities work for 3 months, but we also do charities work. So we aim to give a fair spread. We also aim to ensure that during the first 6 months you have a reasonable spread, so that when you start your second 6 months and you're entitled then to do work on your own account, you have some of the basics behind you. Let's say if you're going to be doing a little bit of insolvency work on your own account, we will ensure that you have got some background training in that first. We also, there will also be different sorts of training as well as you go through your pupillage. This year, we're trialling some online module training, so that instead of just getting you to read chambers policies, we've changed that into an online module training this week. For example, you won't from your supervisor necessarily get training in money laundering, but we have an online training module that will take you through the basics of money laundering and all the regulatory stuff that's become over the last number of years at the bar sort of increasingly burdensome for self-employed practitioners to get to grips with. So money laundering, sanctions compliance, what's the other main one? GDPR, cybersecurity and all that sort of stuff. In addition to what you might have already guessed might be different sorts of training, equality and diversity training. We've even got modules on managing stress at the bar and strategic network and business development. So Zara might be able to tell you, because she's been doing these modules, so she might be able to say whether she's enjoyed or not enjoyed doing that online training. And then there's other things as well that you can get on courses during your pupillage. So it might be forensic accounting. I think we do still probably an opportunity to go to some of the conferences as well. Is that right? I think
that's right.
We've sent pupils on some business development conferences to start. Never too early to start your business development. Above all, before I stop on this subject, it's a supportive place. So whatever stage you're at in your pupillage, there will be the opportunity not only to have feedback from your supervisor, but also you'll have a dedicated buddy who you can talk to, which I think is one of the junior tenants in the year immediately above yours. And then a bit later on, I think I'll have time to talk about your growing business relationship with the clerks as well. So what we seek to do is foster and nurture all the professional relationships that you will need to have as a barrister, whilst giving you, the support network you need to make sure you have someone to talk to if there's any sort of problem at any time.
Thanks, Kate. I can certainly.
Now you can tell us about how your pupillage complies or doesn't comply with all that.
Well, luckily it matches with that. And just to start with, in terms of the training that Kate mentioned, so we have a lot of modules that we've been able to cover. And they've been really useful, not just in terms of giving us an overview of like the legislation that we need to follow, like GDPR, but it's also been really useful for the ethics exam that we've just sat. So it was a great foundation for that.
Can I just sort of quickly interject and ask whether, because you can do those modules in your own time,
Yes.
can't you? I mean, there's no set time to do them. They're available to you online. Do you sort of, what's your personal preference? Do you sort of look at them for a half an hour here or there, or is that what, you don't have to do them in a big batch, do you?
No, what I've tended to do is do them towards the end of the day, where I feel like I may not be able to cover my pupillage work in as much detail as I would do. So I do it as like a rounding off exercise at the end of the day and just slowly work through them.
Yeah.
They've been really useful though. And I'll briefly talk about my pupillage experience so far. So just to give an overview, I sat in a private client seat for my first seat, and now my company and insolvency seat now. So it's been really great so far. In my first seat, I covered areas like trusts, property, and also pensions, which is a great area to be able to be exposed to at this stage. And I'll now be covering various areas now, including insolvency, company law, and perhaps some civil fraud as well. And in 3 words, I describe my experience as varied, positive, and interesting. And I just wanted to mention briefly the opportunities that pupils have. So we have lots of opportunities, and the way that this comes about is that you've got opportunities to experience lots of different areas of practice, as Kate's mentioned. You also have opportunities to go to court quite regularly. So oftentimes people will knock on your door and say, oh, well, I'm seeing this case today. Do you want to join? So that's been really great to see what other members of chambers do and get exposed to their work. So, for example, all 3 pupils towards the end of last term got to go to the Court of Appeal, where we saw 3 members of our chambers in a case there. So that was really great to see. And we've also been able to go to conferences like Kate has mentioned. So that includes Radcliffe's internal conferences, like the private client and restructuring and insolvency conferences that we've just had. But I also went to the white paper conference for the pensions.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So that was really great. Fantastic networking opportunities. And also Radcliffe's quite social. So we've been able to go to tea and coffee most days, and also get involved in socials like the Christmas party and things like that. So pupils made to feel very welcome here. And just in terms of the work, I've worked on live work all the way through, which I wasn't expecting, and it's been really great. And I thought I'd just give you a flavour of what I've been working on for the last 2 days. So on Tuesday, I finalised a skeleton argument for a company case. I then read papers for a different case ahead of a conference that I had that afternoon. And then I read the papers for a case that I was going to see in court the next day, and which I'll be going to court to see again this afternoon. So Wednesday, I shadowed the barrister in court all day. This was an insolvency trial, and I got to see cross-examination the entire day. So a very varied couple of days for me. And then just to round off about pupillage assessments. So Kate's already mentioned the feedback which we get, and you sort of given feedback as you go along with each piece of work you do. So there were no surprises, and it's done on a very holistic basis as well. But you get written feedback, which I found really helpful because you know where to improve for your next work, well, essentially straight away. So that's been really good. Pupils works monitored quite closely as well, just so that chambers can plug in any gaps. So for example, if you've not seen something like a summary judgment application, then chambers will make sure that you get to see these things, especially before you're on your own feet or for tenancy. Yeah, I think that's what I've got to say about pupillage. So in terms of moving on to the next steps and practicing second six at Radcliffe, what sort of work will pupils be expected to do in their feet, Dawn?
So following on from what Kate said and also from Zara, you will have 2 more pupil supervisors in your second six. So it's not as if you're just left by yourself. So you'll continue to do work for your pupil supervisors. So that just continues on. But the big thing obviously for second six is you start to have your own work, you take on your own cases. And that can be 2 ways. It can be either written advocacy. So for example, you may be being asked to draft skeleton arguments for things, you're putting together and drafting applications, or pleadings, or somebody asks you to prepare an opinion on a particular area of law. So you'll have that. And then the big exciting part for everybody really is the oral advocacy. So I think that's what really makes Radcliffe Chambers stand out compared to a number of other sets. We try and aim to get our pupils on their feet almost from the minute they hit their second six. So we will try and ensure that if you're getting a report, whether it's going over to the winders court and doing a bit of insolvency, or if you're doing maybe a very small county court trial, or if it's an interim application, all different things like that. So basically just to help you over the period of the 6 months to ensure that you have been in court as much as possible. And I think that's really important because it does provide you with so much more experience than a lot of other sets where you're not allowed to take on your own work in terms of an advocacy side of things until you become a tenant. Whereas for our pupils, by the time they hit tenancy, they've got 6 months experience behind them, not only of being in court, but also just getting in front of the judges. So the judges also start to know who they are, building relationships with solicitors and clients, because if they've undertaken a piece of work that's gone well and they've done a court hearing that's gone well, then the hope is the solicitor will come back and say, actually, I'd really like Zara to do this next hearing I have coming up in 2 weeks' time. So I think that's a really key element of pupillage within chambers. One caveat just to say, so don't be panicking that you're going to be overwhelmed with lots of work. It is meant to be a teaching and training period as well. So what we try and ensure is that, for example, you have a maximum of maybe 1 court hearing a week and 1 written piece of work every 2 weeks. That's not set in stone, it is negotiable, but that's just the general standard. So it's quite an exciting time, I think, when you hit second six here.
That's great to know. And moving forward now to tenancy. So one area that might be of interest to applicants is how important the culture of the chambers is to how successful you are as a member. So Dawn, could you please explain what chambers culture is like and what opportunities there are for socialising and networking?
Indeed, and again, I think this is something very important from our point of view. We really see culture as a key aspect of pupillage, tenancy, and just being a member of chambers here. Radcliffe has, I think, an excellent professional reputation, but it's also a sociable place. It's a very inclusive place to work. There's an open door policy, which I really like. So in other words, if you have any sort of question, you can just pop into somebody's room, knock the door, go in, have a chat with them, pick up the phone, go and speak to the clerks, speak to them about it. It is very much an open door policy. And that means whether you're going to somebody much more senior than you, or even somebody who's much more junior than you, who has more experience in that particular aspect of something that you want to talk about, it goes across the range. Zara's also commented and touched on the fact that we have morning coffee and we also do afternoon tea every day. And again, that's really fun. You don't have to go every day to it, but the opportunity is there if you want to come along, see some other members of Chambers. And the people who go to those, it's not just the juniors. You'll have across the range again of very senior people pop in for afternoon tea. And it's a nice way just to get to see your colleagues, because otherwise there is that fear, isn't it? The bar could be a very lonely place. You come in, you sit in your room, you do your work and you leave. And it's not like that here. And I think the opportunities are there for you if you want to go and have a chat in a social way, a coffee or afternoon tea. We also have internal Christmas parties. We have summer parties internally. We also have a number of conferences and client events that we always invite our pupils to, because I think as Kate touched on it, it's never too early to start to build those relationships with clients, and just in terms of BD and so forth, it's a good opportunity to try that out. And they help foster relationships for you, again, with your clients, with solicitors, but also with, I think, other members of Chambers. I think that, in my view, helps create a very friendly and also, I think, a cohesive environment within Chambers. So yes, culture is very important here.
Thank you. And Kate, what's the transition from pupillage to tenancy like?
Well, I think we've touched a little bit on this already, but again, just to go back for my own comparative purposes to thinking about what life was like for me when I finished my pupillage and started tenancy. It was a little bit like kind of stepping off the edge of a cliff. You had the security of doing all this interesting work for your supervisors, maybe doing one or two hearings in your second six if you were lucky, and maybe a bit of deviling or a bit of written work for yourself. And then suddenly there it is, October the 1st, and you're on your own. Well, it's not like that at Radcliffe at all, for a number of reasons, which I'll try to break down. First, you will have the opportunity to do a little bit more second six work than you will get at a lot of other sets of chambers. That's not to say you wouldn't be prepared in another set of chambers, but it's just a way we do things here. That to give you the advocacy experience, we prefer that it shouldn't necessarily be lots of in-house exercises, but actually you should be doing something meaningful, client-based in your own right. So there is more advocacy experience. So as Dawn said, and I won't repeat what she said, you've already got the chance to start fostering your relationships with solicitors and judges, and of course giving yourself the experience and confidence that only comes with actually doing something for real. So it won't be a drop off the cliff like it potentially was for me back in the day. I think the other main thing is that there's an acute awareness now of, in 2024, 2025, of fostering relationships with solicitor clients and developing that during your second 6 months. We are often in the position in these chambers of being able to tell pupillage candidates for tenancy in June, July time that their application has been successful and that they will be a junior tenant in 3 months' time. So that summer period can be, there will be a focus there on developing the pupils' relationship with the clerks. So there'll be meetings with the clerks. The chief executive will meet pupils and start talking about how their early days of business development. There'll be all those sorts of transitions that will take place over a period of months, rather than suddenly at the beginning of October thinking, I need an accountant, I need to get to know my clerk, I need to meet a few solicitors. So all that will take place over a more gradual period. And therefore, the transition into tenancy, the hope is that it will be pretty seamless, a smooth swim rather than a jump off a deep diving board. One thing I do want to say though, as chair of our pupillage committee, is that we do jealously guard the principle that the second 6 is just as much an opportunity to learn from your pupil supervisor as your first 6. So whilst we do let you off the leash a little bit to do your own work, at the same time, we're kind of reeling in that leash to make sure that you are not simply exposed to endless winding up petitions that in fact aren't giving you, after the first couple of times, a really good educational experience. So we want you still to be doing the difficult work for your supervisor, so that you can build on that substantive knowledge that will undoubtedly stand you in good stead later on. So yes, there is the second six work, but we do try to strike a very good balance with that. Is that fair, Dawn?
Yeah, I think that sounds fair.
Yes.
Do a steady swim rather than a jump off a diving board. So Kate and Dawn, could you both, I know you've built already in terms of the buddies that we have, and the support systems that we have in place already, but could you just, are there any other additional support systems for new tenants?
Yes, well, I think really building on the open door policy I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, that still stands. Obviously, whatever stage you are in chambers, I still do it. I still go and ask questions at Kate and different people of different things, because it's always helpful to have that. But also we do have a more formal mentoring system in place. And that means that somebody who's a bit more senior than you will be allocated as your mentor as you're coming through. So that's somebody who's a specific person to you that you can then ask questions of, and you can go to them and they can help you and give you advice. So I think that's probably two of the key things that we put in place.
Thank you very much. How about you, Kate? Any other?
Yeah, I think I wanted to touch again on resilience, didn't I? Because I mentioned that earlier on. I think you've got to be prepared. Being at the self-employed bar, I think is brilliant. That's where I want to be. I've always wanted to be my own boss, making my own decisions, making my own mistakes sometimes. So I think you need to have the mindset that you do want to be that person. We have transferring solicitors, for example, who have been solicitors for a few years, who now want to come to the bar because they want more independent control of their workload. So remember that's what you're getting into with the bar. That comes with its pros and cons. For me and for the people that are at Radcliffe Chambers, they've obviously decided that mostly it's a situation of pros rather than cons. But the cons are obviously ultimately you are your own boss and the buck stops with you. That's what life as a barrister is like. So the support network in Chambers is very strong, and you should take advantage of it. As an applicant, taking the initiative, I think a way to do that and make your application stand out more is acquire as much knowledge as you can about anticipating what life at the bar is like. So, do several mini pupilages if you can. Learn with lots of questions from other pupils in Chambers if you get the chance to talk to them, and the junior tenants and someone with whom you'll do your mini pupil supervisor. Ask all those sorts of questions. So not simply kind of what law am I interested in. I'm taking it for granted that you are deeply interested in a legal career, but ask all those other sorts of questions. What's it like being self-employed? How do you manage the demands of your practice? It's obviously being an organised person, asking the right questions of the right people at the right time. I think advice to my younger self is, if you look back, I wish I'd asked more questions. I think I probably did ask enough, but that would be my key piece of advice. Never be afraid of thinking that your question is a silly one. Ask away, and you will find that people at the bar are pretty generous in giving you answers, and they will be generous of their time. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to fail. As Dawn I think said, give it a go.
Yeah, excellent advice there, and so I'll try and bear in mind myself. So we've had lots of questions online. Thank you very much for everyone who's asked questions. We'll try and get through as many as we can. So the first one that we can see here is just in terms of the STAR technique on a covering letter. So Kate or Dawn, do you have any thoughts about how to flesh out
Do
your
you want me
experience
to
in the
take
right
the
way.
first one and then you can take the next one if depending on. I'm asked, we're asked, is there a specific level of detail that Chambers is looking for in supporting examples in the covering letter? So do we have a preference, for example, for setting out I'll tell you about a situation, I'll tell you what I did, I'll tell you what what the result was, or would we prefer multiple shorter experiences? Is that going to be better use of the space? First thing I would say is we have no particular preference for any particular type of answer. This is your way of showing us what you are like as a candidate. So if you have a variety of different examples that tell us how you would satisfy the criteria, then give us more rather than fewer. Always bearing in mind, of course, that we will want to know why you have selected a particular thing to tell us about. So it's no good simply reeling off a great list of things I have done if we cannot tell from what you are telling us why you think that's going to make you a good candidate for a life at the bar. So use your own good judgment. There is no absolutely right answer to that question. I think we'd probably be quite bored as a committee if you gave us a single example of something you had done and talked about it for a page and a half of your 2 pages. So use your own judgment. You can be as nuanced as you like, and it depends on the specific examples that you want to give us. Be judicious in your choices is what I would say. That's slightly fudging the question, but the real answer to the question is there is no absolutely right way to write a perfect covering letter. It will depend on the examples that you have and you want to give us to demonstrate your suitability.
Thank you, Kate. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think Kate's covered that.
There's one quick question just in terms of whether the institution that someone studies at for their GDL or the bar course is taken into consideration.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I think the main thing is that you have completed that particular aspect of your education.
Yeah.
Where you did that is neither here nor there.
No, I completely agree. I think one thing might be worth bearing in mind is the opportunities at various places. So, for example, whether they have mooting opportunities, things like that might be ideal, just to bear in mind for your own purposes when you're applying. But if not, there's lots of external opportunities for things like that. So it's neither here nor there. Another question is in terms of when showing evidence of interest in Radcliffe, do you recommend having a reason beyond the legal areas?
Shall I answer that one? I think, yes, you do want to show something beyond that, because ultimately the areas of practice that we have here at Radcliffe will be very similar to some of the other sets that you might be applying to. So that in itself doesn't really set us apart. It's the bigger picture as to why you want to come here. So, for example, if you've been at an event and you've spoken to somebody from Radcliffe, you can say, I met X such at that event. If that was very interesting for these reasons they told me, but you can build on that. Or if you've listened to a really interesting webinar by certain people, you can mention that in the covering letter. Things like that. And it's again going back to the culture, that's something that's important. If you've been here in a mini pupillage and you've enjoyed your time here, tell us about that in your covering letter. Tell us about that in the interview if it comes up. Or just really things that make it a bit more personal towards Radcliffe Chambers itself. And I think that's important to try and get that out there if you can. Again, going back to something I mentioned earlier about the fact that we really push the oral advocacy in your second six. That's different to other sets. So that's another reason as to why you would maybe want to come here over another set that does the same work that we do. So it's really just making us feel that when we look at your covering letter, you want to come to Radcliffe Chambers as opposed to another Chancery commercial set that's somewhere in the end.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for bearing it with us. I realise we've run over slightly. So thank you to our panel and thank you very much to everyone for joining us this morning.
Can I just do one last thing before everybody goes? It's really just 2 points I want to raise is that as interviewers, we're not looking for you to always get everything right. So please remember that. We're not here to trick you. Often when we're asking you a question, what we're looking to see is how you deal with that question. Do you freeze and panic? Or do you take a moment, think about it, and then try and answer? So even if you get the answer wrong, that's not necessarily going to be a bad thing. So do bear that in mind, because I think a lot of people think, oh, you know, when I'm being asked this question, it's because there's an element of trickery behind it.
I think that's
What's happening here. It's not.
Yeah.
We just want to see how you deal with a difficult question, because the reality is when you're standing in a courtroom and a judge asks you a difficult question, which happens quite a lot, what are you going to do? Stand and go, so we want to see that looking at you as how will you deal with things as a future tenant in court? Will you be somebody who can take your time, work through it? Maybe not necessarily get it completely right, but do the best you can. That's one thing. And just one last thing is that please remember that there's no particular person who becomes and who makes a good barrister. A barrister's chambers, like Radcliffe and all other sets, is made up of very different personalities and very different people. If it's something you're interested in, then take the step, make the application and go for it. Don't feel, oh, I'm not sure if I'm somebody who's a typical barrister. I really enjoy my work. I get to meet different people on different days. I'm doing lots of different things. I love the fact that I still get a little bit of anticipation and nerves when I'm in court. I think that's really good. But I enjoy that advocacy side. I love being self-employed and the independence. And I do think it's a really great career, and it is something that I say, if you're thinking about it, don't be put off by the fact that you may worry about there being stereotypical barrister. There isn't. It's a very broad brush. So that was just very quickly, sorry to keep people.
No, that's a great point. And in terms of that, Kate, do you have any final tips for applicants?
I mentioned, didn't I, the resilience point. I think don't ever be afraid, whether you're applying to come to the bar or otherwise. And I say this as the mother of sons as well. And I'm always saying to them, don't be afraid. Give it a go. Give it a go. It doesn't matter if you fail, if you've given it a good shot. And returning to the point of statistics, a lot of superb people do not get pupillage first time round. We have taken people who have applied, not necessarily to us for a second time, but have tried 1 year, haven't got it, have gone away and thought, how can I make my CV better? How can I get a bit more experience? I've got really good academic results, but I guess my experience let me down. How can I improve on that? What can I do that will make my application a little bit better next time around? So always remember that if you don't get pupillage in your first year of trying, it's not necessarily and probably invariably not because you're not good enough, but just that you need that little bit extra. It's a very competitive process. You might need a little bit extra experience in one sphere or another to make your application more rounded for the following year. So don't be afraid.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.
Hopefully we've answered all of your questions. But if you do have any left, then please do check out our website and our pupillage policy. And there's also lots of videos on our YouTube page. So check them out and they'll hopefully answer any of the questions. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.